From the moment the storm approached, the cold winds of the Los Angeles suburbs lifted the curtain on an incredible story, as in a high-end residential community where every detail was meticulously maintained according to HOA rules. A trivial matter suddenly became the spark that awakened an entire community, and amid the quiet atmosphere of a chilly morning, when the soft light of dawn gently filtered through the lush green trees, the residents, barely having time to marvel, were swept into a tempest of news. A humble man, living in a modest little house among a row of dazzling mansions, whom no one knew concealed within him a multi-billion-dollar real estate empire, had been slapped with an enormous fine of $100,000 by Karen, a rigid yet passionate member of the HOA board, for a minor violation concerning a decorative plant in front of his house that did not comply with the prescribed standards. In that moment, every step taken by the residents, every curious glance, and every whispered remark became laden with weight, as if the fate of the entire community were suspended by the slender thread of uncompromising authoritarianism and relentless imposition. While Karen stood there, her impassive face and sharp eyes reflecting an unwavering belief in order and rules, she permitted no explanation or leniency from the man, and her voice resounded in the assembly hall like an indisputable declaration. Rules must be strictly enforced with no exceptions whatsoever, causing the surrounding atmosphere to become stifling, as if every speck of dust in the air were swept along by the cold gusts of regulation. The man, with a calm demeanor yet eyes that held a deep history of hardships and quiet victories, stood silently amid the crowd, his heart swelling not only with shock at the enormous fine but also with fierce indignation at the authoritarianism, as a mere trivial detail such as a decorative plant could be wielded as a weapon to ridicule and impose power upon an individual. How can it come to this? He thought to himself, each word echoing the very accusations of his soul, as he sensed that blind adherence to dry regulations could obscure the true value of personal freedom and dignity. In the past, when he first set foot in this residential community, he had dreamed of a peaceful living space where every resident could freely express their individuality, where creativity and beauty were cherished above any rigid regulation. But now, in this very moment, the land he once trusted had become the stage for a tragic drama of oppression and abuse of power, shaking his faith in justice. The atmosphere grew even denser as the whispers of residents echoed through the corridors, intermingled with attentive glances, each word and gesture imbued with a blend of anxiety, astonishment, and a fragile hope for change. "I never imagined that something so trivial could be handled in such an extreme manner," murmured an elderly resident to his companion, while others watched silently, as if striving to decipher the mystery of an unbelievable event. Meanwhile, Karen remained unruffled by the mounting public pressure. Each time she met the eyes of the residents or listened to the murmurs around her, she grew ever more determined to defend the purity of the rules which she believed upheld order. Yet deep within, faint glimmers of uncertainty began to emerge as she realized that perhaps, behind that $100,000 figure, there were not only regulations but also the lives and untold stories of each resident. However, her confidence and steadfast belief in the law compelled her to choose a hardline stance, regardless of any advice or tender emotions. Despite the turmoil raging within him, a tumult of anger and disappointment, the man maintained a calm demeanor when facing Karen, his eyes serene yet profound as if to convey, "I understand that rules are necessary, but not everything can be measured by cold, hard numbers." And in that moment, his words were not merely a spontaneous reaction but also the voice of a soul that had weathered many storms, a silent declaration of the value of personal freedom and self-respect. His emotions grew ever more complex as he recalled the past. The difficult days he had endured to build his real estate empire, the sleepless nights spent at his desk, the tough decisions made in silence, all etched deeply into his memory, rendering the present moment even more significant and cherished. "Perhaps this is just a small trial, but I will not let injustice seize my heart," he thought, feeling each heartbeat as a reminder that no matter how much time changes, the true worth of a person cannot be measured solely by the regulations and numbers imposed by society. In that context, the living space of this upscale residential community, once built on the foundations of perfection and order, had become rife with contradictions, with every nook and every minute detail bearing witness to the clash between the individual and the system. The flickering light from the street lamps along the roadside seemed to strive to illuminate the inner souls, exposing both their fears and hopes, while the whispering wind through the cracks of the doors composed a melancholic and haunting melody. Meanwhile, a quiet conversation unfolded in the corridor when a young resident, with innocent eyes yet harboring a deep yearning for justice, softly asked, "Do you think that perhaps we are living in a world where freedom is nothing but an illusion?" And that question was met with a slight nod from an elderly friend who had experienced many ups and downs yet dared not voice that the very system they trusted was gradually betraying the very human values they cherished. Those whispered words, though soft and fleeting, helped paint the psychological portrait of the entire community, forging an intangible bond of empathy among those who had once dreamed of a better life. While Karen continued to stand firm, asserting her position with every rigid declaration, the man quietly listened and observed, discerning every glimmer of truth hidden behind the rules and every reverberation of injustice reflected in the eyes of the neighbors. With each passing moment, his mind flowed like a rushing river, carrying all the memories and emotions of a past filled with sweat and tears, and now, when facing a challenge from a system he once trusted, he felt a fire ignite within. His heart, not merely one of indignation, but also a determined resolve to rise, affirming that no matter who might impose numbers and regulations upon life, the value of a human being can never be quantified. In that very moment, as the wind howled through the cracks in the doors and the morning light filtered through every leaf, the entire community seemed to pause to witness the beginning of an inner struggle, a journey demanding courage and perseverance, where each individual stood not only for their own rights but also for a belief in justice, freedom, and dignity. And the man in that modest house, with eyes full of passion, though aware that the road ahead would be anything but easy, resolved to hold fast to his beliefs, ready to face every challenge in order to open a new chapter for the community, one in which no one would be judged by appearances, and every rule would merely serve as a means to build a fair, humane, and hopeful society. The legal battle between me and Karen, along with the HOA board, was no longer just an internal issue for the neighborhood. It had turned into a lawsuit that shocked public opinion. When I officially filed the lawsuit, the media immediately got involved, reporting extensively on the event. A series of articles appeared across major news outlets, special reports were broadcast on television, and legal analysts debated on various forums. All eyes were on the lawsuit, and the pressure mounted on Karen and the HOA board. I sat in the meeting room with my team of lawyers, listening to their detailed analysis on how we would proceed with the case. One of my lawyers, a middle-aged man with graying hair, pushed his glasses up his nose and spoke confidently. "We have enough evidence to prove that the HOA has abused its power, enforcing unreasonable rules and violating the residents' rights. With the media's attention and the public pressure, I'm sure the court will take this case seriously." I nodded, my gaze calm yet determined. I not only wanted to win the case, but I also wanted to change the entire HOA system so that others would not have to endure the injustice I faced. The first day of the trial, the courtroom was packed. Karen sat across from me, her face still trying to maintain her composure, but her eyes were filled with anxiety. Other members of the HOA also showed visible signs of tension. The trial began with my lawyer presenting solid evidence showing how the HOA had arbitrarily imposed unjust fines without any legal basis. Images of threatening emails from Karen, copies of internal documents proving the HOA's abuse of power, and testimonies from other residents about their own experiences, all these were submitted to the court. When Karen was questioned by my lawyer, she became flustered. She tried to justify herself. "I was just enforcing the rules to maintain order and the neighborhood's aesthetic. If everyone ignores the rules, the place will become chaotic." My lawyer immediately rebutted, "But you deliberately used these rules to threaten and impose your personal authority on the residents. Furthermore, can you explain why you singled out the plaintiff in particular?" Karen couldn't offer a response. The atmosphere in the courtroom became heavy, as other witnesses took the stand testifying to the injustice they had suffered at the hands of the HOA. The truth was gradually revealed. An elderly woman trembled as she recounted how the HOA imposed an unreasonable fine on her just for placing a flower pot outside her front door. A young couple shared how they were forced to repair their front yard to meet a strict standard even though it had not been outlined in the original contract. Public outrage escalated as the trial continued over several weeks. Finally, the court delivered its verdict. The HOA had acted unlawfully and must be held accountable. The $100,000 fine that they had imposed on me was not only revoked, but the HOA was also ordered to compensate me and other residents who had suffered from their actions. Karen was removed from her position and a major restructuring of the HOA was initiated to ensure transparency and fairness in its operations. When I walked out of the courthouse, I took a deep breath. Journalists surrounded me, microphones and cameras pointed toward me. A reporter asked, "Do you have any message for other residents who are facing similar situations?" I looked into the lens, my voice calm but firm. Never let fear force you to bow down before injustice. If you know you're right, fight for it. Justice isn't something that's given to us, it has to be earned. Those words quickly spread across the media, becoming a symbol of the fight against authoritarianism. Other neighborhoods across the U.S. began to reconsider their HOA systems, calling for greater transparency in management. New laws were proposed to protect residents' rights from the abuse of power. A week later, I returned to my neighborhood. Everything was the same, yet the atmosphere had changed. Neighbors who had once been hesitant toward the HOA were now more confident, greeting me with respect and gratitude. An elderly man approached to shake my hand. "Thank you, because of you, we no longer have to live in fear." I smiled and shook his hand. I didn't fight merely for myself, but for all those who had been oppressed yet silenced. Looking back at my house, I knew that everything had changed. Not just for me, but for the entire community. And that was the greatest victory. News about the enormous $100,000 fine quickly spread throughout the streets of the residential community, causing the once peaceful atmosphere to suddenly become chaotic and tense as lively debates erupted among the residents, each harboring conflicting emotions ranging from vigorous support for Karen's strictness to fearful whispers about the imposing power of the HOA system because Karen, with her cold demeanor and uncompromising words, asserted that there were no exceptions to the rules and threatened to file a lawsuit immediately if the fined man did not accept that enormous sum, thereby creating a wave that stirred up indignation and doubt in the hearts of residents who had trusted in order and fairness from the very first evenings. Under the warm glow of the setting sun, the chatter of residents outside the luxurious homes resonated through the corridors, where a young resident with worried eyes gently said to a friend, "If this rule is applied rigidly, we will lose both our freedom and our humanity," while an elderly person who had always believed in maintaining strict order replied, "Rules are established to protect order, not to tarnish the value of our neighborhood." With each word reflecting the contradiction between upholding regulations and the desire to live a life unbound by dry numbers, in an emergency meeting of the HOA board, Karen stood on the podium with sharp eyes, her voice echoing throughout the room as she declared, "The rules have been clearly established, and if they are not followed, the consequences are inevitable," which made the atmosphere in the room heavy and full of pressure as the other board members, though seemingly hesitant, did not dare to oppose her decision, thereby painting a picture of an authoritarian system that gradually shook the faith of some residents. Meanwhile, the fined man, a person who carried many mysteries and a complex past, despite receiving that horrifying notice, maintained a calm and silent demeanor, his eyes showing no sign of fear but instead containing an indescribable determination, as if he were silently affirming that, even though the system had imposed an excessive fine, he still believed that truth and justice would soon prevail. In a chance encounter while walking through the common corridor of the building, he met a middle-aged neighbor who had witnessed many incidents in the community, and in that brief moment, he said in a soft yet determined voice, "I believe that everyone deserves to be treated fairly, and sometimes silence is the strongest weapon to await the unveiling of the truth," a statement that served as a resolute affirmation of a spirit unyielding to the system's pressure, causing the neighbor, with affectionate eyes, to nod in agreement, even though he did not dare to admit that deep down he was also worried about the future of the neighborhood. Outside the official meetings, intimate conversations on porches under the cool shade of trees further highlighted the contrasting thoughts among the residents. As a group of young people discussed, "We cannot allow such a rigid rule to determine the fate of individuals. Let us together seek a balance between order and freedom," while some older residents asserted, "Rules are the foundation for maintaining order, and if we abandon all regulations, the entire community will collapse." And through these dialogues, the relationships among community members grew increasingly complicated as each Persons seemed to have a different perspective, yet all had to face the pressure not only from the system itself but also from their own minds and sense of dignity. The pressure from the board escalated as Karen allowed no leniency. And whenever any resident posed a question or expressed any doubt, she responded in a cold and dry manner, leaving no room for empathy or compassion. As when one board member asked, "Is there any flexibility for exceptional cases?" And Karen replied without hesitation, "Rules are rules, there is no room for exceptions," a response that struck like a powerful blow to the hearts of those who longed for fairness and humanity in governance, further intensifying doubts about the system's authoritarian nature. Moreover, the pressure from the community gradually manifested through private meetings and informal gatherings among residents, where stories, chatter, and even glances suggested that although they might not directly intervene in Karen's decisions, their underlying fear and discontent were silently rising as a warning that if authoritarianism continued, one day the entire community would rise to demand change. Meanwhile, the fined man continued to live his life, but inside him, memories of the past, of a person who had faced numerous hardships and built a real estate empire unknown to many, slowly seeped out and revealed themselves through every glance and gesture, as a sign that within him there was not only outward modesty but also a surprisingly potent inner strength, ready to stand up against injustice no matter how immense the system's pressure. One afternoon, as the soft sunlight of the setting sun bathed the common corridor, he had a private conversation with another board member whose eyes were both timid and curious, and he gently said, "I do not believe I am the only one under such pressure, and I trust that, no matter how many difficulties there are, the truth will eventually assert its value." Words that, though not loud, served as encouragement to those feeling oppressed by the system's tyranny, and even in the midst of tense confrontations his eyes radiated the belief that every individual has the right to live fully and freely. While Karen continued to maintain her rigid stance, allowing no sign of change or compromise, the residents increasingly began discussing the fairness of the system in conversations over the phone, via messages, or during chance encounters at the supermarket. As one woman told her friend, "I fear that if we let Karen and those like her control everything, we will lose not only our money but also our dignity." And her friend replied, "That's true, but perhaps we need to think very carefully before rising in opposition, because great change often comes from the smallest steps." And through these remarks, the relationships among community members gradually became entangled, as the division between those who supported strict order and those yearning for personal freedom became increasingly evident. The pressure from the system was not limited to Karen's declarations but also permeated every action and gesture in the residents' daily lives, causing each step and word to be carefully measured before being expressed. As a form of self-control, when everyone clearly sensed that, under the shadow of the system, personal freedom was gradually becoming fragile and vulnerable, and even the words of encouragement and intimate conversations among residents could not hide the fear of a future where the power of those at the top of the system might become too overwhelming, threatening every brick and every soul in the community. In that very moment, under the gentle light of the afternoon and amid the heavy atmosphere of pressure coming from all sides, the fined man quietly continued his path, his gaze challenging all prejudices and impositions, and although his words were few, his very presence caused not only Karen but the entire community to pause and reflect on the meaning of freedom and fairness. And gradually, in every conversation and every exchanged glance among residents, the question of whether authoritarianism was truly necessary and whether the right to live freely could be exchanged for dry numbers was raised in a subtle yet haunting manner, thereby opening a new chapter for the neighborhood. A chapter where relationships among people were defined not only by rigid rules but also by trust, empathy, and the courage to stand up against systemic pressure, so that little by little, that tense atmosphere might eventually give way to new hope. A beginning for change in which every voice and every action would contribute to shaping a fairer and more humane future for everyone. When the atmosphere of the neighborhood was already steeped in the tension of legal disputes following pressure from the system, on a quiet afternoon when the weak sunlight of the sunset peeked through the cool green foliage, everything suddenly changed dramatically. The man, who had always maintained a calm demeanor, with deep eyes carrying both a past of hardships and silent victories, unexpectedly revealed that within him was not only a firm belief in justice but also a great secret that few could have imagined. He was a real estate billionaire with an immense portfolio stretching across major cities in the United States, from the towering skyscrapers of New York to the bustling commercial centers of Los Angeles. the luxurious resorts of Miami, and the nationally significant urban development projects in Chicago. This revelation left not only the residents but also the HOA board members in shock, especially Karen, the woman who prided herself on her strictness and unwavering enforcement of regulations. The hushed whispers of hallway conversations spread like an unending chorus as a young resident muttered, "I never imagined that this man could be hiding such a big secret," while an elderly woman, her voice trembling yet sincere, murmured, "We judged a person by their appearance, and now that the truth is out, all we can do is be astonished." Meanwhile, across media platforms, from print newspapers to television and social networks, the story exploded like an uncontrollable flood. Seasoned journalists continuously updated every detail about his hidden past, from high-stakes real estate deals to sleepless nights spent at his desk, painting a vivid picture of a man who was not only financially successful but also a symbol of perseverance and resilience. Amid the chaos of emergency HOA board meetings, Karen attempted to maintain her stance, firmly declaring, "Regulations must be upheld, and regardless of any exceptions, the law does not allow us to bend the rules." However, the newly unveiled truth rendered her words almost meaningless. In that moment of high drama, the man, his voice deep yet commanding, stated, "I have endured countless hardships to build what I have today, and I will not let rigid regulations dictate the value of a person." His words were not just a challenge to the system, but also a defiance against old prejudices, causing murmurs to ripple through the meeting room and the entire neighborhood. A middle-aged board member, his eyes laced with contempt, remarked, "Perhaps it's time we reconsider how we evaluate people, not just by numbers, but by their real worth." Experts and investors quickly joined the discourse, analyzing that his vast portfolio was not just a collection of figures on financial reports, but a testament to persistence, talent, and the ability to turn crises into opportunities. Meanwhile, Karen, standing amid the waves of criticism and shock, struggled to conceal the unease in her eyes. Every question from residents and every murmur from HOA members demanded transparency and fairness, forcing Karen to stammer, "We have always followed the rules, and this is merely an isolated case." Yet her words only fueled further doubt and confusion, as people realized that this man was not just someone being fined, but an individual with an extraordinary journey of strategic decisions and silent sacrifices. As journalists continued dissecting every transaction and project linked to him, a renowned real estate expert appeared on television, speaking in a calm yet compelling tone. "He is not just a billionaire. He is a symbol of innovation and courage, someone who turned challenges into stepping stones." Meanwhile, an ordinary resident, his eyes filled with emotion, murmured, "It's hard to believe that we've lived alongside someone with such vision, yet judged him over trivial matters." With each word and each gaze, the neighborhood became a battleground of conflicting emotions, admiration, astonishment, skepticism, and a reevaluation of the regulatory system they had blindly trusted for years. As the truth unraveled, it seemed as though every boundary, every limit in people's perceptions, had been shattered, sparking broader conversations about personal freedom, the right to be respected, and the rigid nature of rules. Amid this emotional upheaval, the man reaffirmed, "I am not proud of my wealth or title. I am proud of the journey I have taken, and I hope that through this revelation, we all learn to judge fairly, not by cold regulations but by the true worth of a person." His words, like a refreshing breeze sweeping through the tense atmosphere, prompted many to question what they once believed was unchangeable. In hushed hallway talks, under the dim glow of cafe lights, and through rapid-fire messages on social media, new questions arose about the fairness of the system. Can we live under regulations that leave no room for flexibility or humanity? And is a person's value truly determined by fines, or is it found in moments of understanding, compassion, and shared experiences? These questions forced not only Karen but the entire HOA board to face the reality that the system they had upheld might not be as solid as they once believed. As media coverage intensified, interviews, court hearings, and press conferences unfolded in rapid succession. Yet, through it all, the man, his expression calm but his eyes ablaze with passion, declared, "I know this truth may change how we see each other, but I believe only transparency and courage can build a fair and humane community." His words, though spoken gently, thundered through the tension-filled air, resonating in the hearts of everyone, from the smallest resident to the most senior board member. And so, as debates raged on, as breaking news reports continued, and as deep conversations flourished, the story of the real estate billionaire became more than just a shocking revelation. It became a powerful reminder that truth and courage could dismantle prejudices, shatter the confines of an oppressive system, and open a new chapter for the community. A chapter where people were not just bound by rigid rules, but where they could freely communicate, share, and assert their true worth. This turning point transformed the neighborhood from a place of blind compliance into a space of fairness, transparency, and humanity, marking the beginning of a new era. And in the end, his story was no longer just about wealth or status. It was about resilience, about breaking barriers, and about proving that no system, no regulation, could ever truly define the worth of a person. Only their courage, determination, and unwavering pursuit of justice could. The legal battle between me and Karen, along with the HOA board, was no longer just an internal issue within the neighborhood. It had become a lawsuit that shook public opinion. As soon as I officially filed my lawsuit, the media immediately jumped in, reporting on the event extensively. Numerous articles appeared on major news sites, special reports were broadcast on television, and legal analysts debated the case in various forums. All eyes were on the lawsuit, and the pressure on Karen and the HOA board kept mounting. I sat in the conference room with my team of lawyers, listening to their detailed analysis of how we would proceed with the case. One of my attorneys, a graying man, pushed his glasses up his nose and confidently said, "We have enough evidence to prove that the HOA has abused its power, imposed unreasonable regulations, and violated residents' rights. With media attention and public pressure, I am confident that the court will take this case seriously." I nodded, my gaze calm yet resolute. I didn't just want to win the lawsuit, I wanted to change the entire HOA system so that others would no longer suffer the same injustice as I did. On the first day of the trial, the courtroom was packed. Karen sat across from me, trying to maintain a composed expression, but her eyes betrayed her anxiety. The other HOA board members also looked visibly tense. The trial began with my lawyer presenting solid evidence that the HOA had arbitrarily enforced baseless and excessive fines. Screenshots of Karen's threatening emails, copies of internal documents proving the HOA's abuse of power, and testimonies from multiple residents were all submitted to the court. When questioned by the attorney, Karen started to falter. She tried to justify herself. "I was simply enforcing the rules to maintain order and beauty in the neighborhood. If everyone breaks the rules, this place will become chaotic." My lawyer immediately countered, "But you deliberately used these regulations to intimidate and exert personal authority over the residents. Furthermore, can you explain why you specifically targeted the plaintiff in such an unusual manner?" Karen had no answer. The atmosphere in the courtroom grew heavier. As more witnesses stepped forward to expose the injustices they had endured at the hands of the HOA, the truth gradually came to light. An elderly woman, her voice trembling, recounted how she was fined an unreasonable amount just for placing a flower pot on her porch. A young couple shared how they were forced to renovate their front yard to an unreasonable standard even though it wasn't part of their original contract. Public outrage surged as the trial continued for several weeks. Finally, the court delivered its verdict. The HOA was found guilty of abusing its power and was held legally accountable. The $100,000 fine they attempted to impose on me was not only overturned, but the HOA was also ordered to compensate me and other affected residents. Karen was removed from her position, and a major restructuring of the HOA was implemented to ensure transparency and fairness in its operations. As I stepped out of the courthouse, I took a deep breath. Reporters swarmed around me, microphones and cameras pointed in my direction. One journalist asked, "Do you have anything to say to other residents facing similar situations?" I looked straight into the camera, my voice steady and firm. "Never let fear force you to bow down to injustice. If you know you're right, fight to the end. Justice is not something readily available, it must be fought for." Those words quickly spread across media platforms, becoming a symbol of resistance against authoritarian control. Neighborhoods across the United States began reevaluating their HOA systems, demanding greater transparency in governance. New laws were proposed to protect residents from the abuse of power. A week later, I returned to my neighborhood. Everything looked the same, but the atmosphere had changed. Neighbors who once feared the HOA now stood with newfound confidence. They greeted me with respect and gratitude. An elderly man approached me and shook my hand. "Thank you. Because of you, we no longer have to live in fear." I smiled and clasped his hand firmly. I hadn't fought just for myself, but for all those who had been oppressed without a voice. Looking back at my house, I knew that everything had changed, not just for me, but for the entire community. And that was the greatest victory of all.